I started getting panic attacks. It was one of the most horrifying experiences, thinking that you're not worth it and you don't know anything and you cannot contribute. You can get stressed out about life and about where you want to go and what you want to do, because just having all these questions come to you out of nowhere is not helpful when you don't have the answers. My first job, I lost it there for just a couple of months. It was a very serious fintech startup. Everyone involved was very, specialized in what they had to do, right? Because in a fintech startup, you really have very specific goals and responsibilities. You really have to be a specialist. For me, I studied quantitative finance and risk management. For me, I just didn't have the right, skills at the time when I joined my first job, my first startup. It just felt like I didn't know what to do, right? I don't think I got the right directions either, but at a startup, you really have to own your own journey, right? You can't really be depending on everyone else to be telling you, okay, should I do this or should I do that? You just have to carry your own weight and you have to contribute in your own way. And so it just kind of reminds me about Paul Graham, right? Paul Graham, in his essay Startups Equals Growth, he just talks about just how the main function of a startup is growth. And I think in the 2 months that I was there in my first job, I was just static. I was, I had just plateaued. I don't think I was really learning anything, and I wasn't really contributing in any meaningful way. So it was just like, they probably fired me thinking like, what do we do with this guy, right? I knew how to hack exams and I knew how to, get things done, some shape or form. Academics don't really translate to the startup environment, because startups are more a place for experimentation and hypothesis testing. There's no real right answer. There's only outcome, right? There's only results. For me, it just felt like I didn't have the right things that I needed, like the right kind of mindset or perspective or problem solving skills that a startup needs. And I think those were majorly the reasons why I got fired. Of course, like I kind of saw it coming. So when, I got fired, I remember going to the conference room and being given the news, and yeah, it was just like in the next 20-30 minutes I was just gone. Like I had a really weird way back home. I was on the bus, and this is back in Hong Kong actually. I don't know if I mentioned that. So I took the bus home, and it was one of the most horrifying experiences, thinking that you're not worth it and you don't know anything and you cannot contribute. Felt bad for a while, but just the next day I started applying for jobs, and I was pretty lucky to find a couple of jobs and offers in the next week. So when that happened, I chose to work with a startup instead of a finance company. These are the two offers that I had, because I was always fascinated by the idea of starting a startup and what that can lead to. Why I got hired was for a few different reasons, I think. Startups look for generalist specialists that have some unique insight or unfair advantage, right? And so in this startup, I think because they were dealing with the Indian market, and because I'm Indian, I had a lot more context that I could provide. I had an unfair advantage for the job, right? Just in a week, I had a very drastic shift in the way that I think and the way that I get obsessed, and I started getting really, really involved, because I definitely took a hit, on my ego. Ego's a big thing. When it crashes down, it really crashes down. And so I was like, okay, let's figure this out. How can I be fired, and how can I change that? And so essentially I started to learn how to speak the language of startups. I started to learn how to what is important really for a startup. I would pick up different things very quickly, from product to growth related stuff to finance to account management and things of that nature. I quickly became an important part of the team as well. They recognized that very early on. I think in the first few months, I started becoming a very important part of the team. Of course, they wanted to have a culture fit, so I think that's why I got hired as well, because I was a good fit in their existing team. And if anybody had said no, I would have not been in their team, right? Because you have to be working with that whole team in some shape or form. And yeah, I think that culture fit is extremely important, especially when there's an existing team that has been set up and running things for a while already. But why did I quit? So the same startup where I got hired, I quit. I think a year later, I started getting panic attacks. It's as simple as that. It was really weird. At the time, I think I was just 22 or 3 maybe, and I started getting panic attacks. I remember I got 3 panic attacks in the span of a month, and so I was just losing my mind. Really, it was getting a little too much. I think the reason for that was mostly the fact that I became a real part of the team, and I became one of the heavy hitters for the team as well. However, the problem was still, lack of success. Like, I remember we were a fairly okay startup, right? Like, we had raised a bunch of money. We had money to operate and do things, but the money, I felt, in my opinion, wasn't maybe being spent right. Maybe our focus was a little bit just kind of in many directions, with not an exact idea of what we need to achieve in order to actually build something that people love. And so we kind of started with a solution in search for a problem, rather than, building something from the bottom up, from after talking to each and every user and customer. And so starting with the solution was not ideal, and it started taking a toll on me. The more I actually started performing, the more I actually learned about the startup ecosystem, what is important, what is not important, what should you focus on versus not. And so, yeah, I just started asking myself more and more questions. And, the more you ask yourself important questions, the more, you can get stressed out about life and about where you want to go and what you want to do, because just having all these questions come to you out of nowhere is not helpful when you don't have the answers, right? And so, yeah, I essentially got 3 panic attacks in the span of a month, and I told my startup founder, and he took it well. He wanted to give me, a month-long leave and told me to come back later. But yeah, I think it was already, like, I'd already reached that point where I was like, you know what, maybe I need to do this. Maybe I need to figure out my life and how can I really, really, truly contribute to a startup, and I need to do it in a different environment. And so, yeah, I quit my job, I think, after a year. I think it's important for people to know, like, have a completely unfiltered truth and perspective on what it takes, what it is, what it feels like why someone does get fired, why someone does get hired, and why someone does quit as well. That's it, guys. Thank you for watching, and adios.